Hi, I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic, and this is Autistic. When you make content about autism, like I do, it's impossible not to bring up the topic of diagnosis, and especially these days, so-called self-diagnosis or self-ID. And your creator mailbag will always have a steady supply of inquiries from folks who are themselves one step away from self-identifying or starting the diagnostic process, but they need to put to rest a last couple of niggling doubts and maybe we can help. I was diagnosed as autistic myself back in the 1980s, before most people had even heard of autism, so self-ID isn't only an experience I didn't have, but I couldn't have had. And learning how folks reach their conclusions independently has been a fascinating journey for me over the last few years. Now, I get a lot of messages, but I still manage to read every single comment, message and email I receive, and I get plenty from folks at that final stage of discovery. Responding to all my messages is another matter, though. I don't like leaving people hanging, so I do want to provide some answers for those folks who are almost but not quite ready to decide, who have one or two last things to get settled before they make their mind up one way or the other. So, over the next few weeks, I'll try to address some of the most common queries I get from those folks on the cusp. So, grab yourself a cuppa, get comfortable, and let's start talking about those "I think I might be autistic, but" questions. Before I begin in earnest, I really do have to resist the urge to grin from ear to ear at this point, because I know there's going to be some scathing comments on this video from clever dicks who haven't even watched the video this far. They'll have seen the title, "How do you know you're definitely autistic?" and written something like, "Go see a doctor," or "Get a proper diagnosis." It might even stretch to the odd, long, detailed piece of creative writing about the evils of self-diagnosis, with perhaps a bit of bile about wokeness for good measure. If you're that person and you have got this far, now's your chance to think better of it and either watch the video in full and then leave your comment, or just not waste your time. Most adults who self-identify do go on to seek a formal diagnosis, and the vast majority of them get one too. So let's not make it harder for them, eh? Whether they want a diagnosis or not. I don't personally care if someone's got their magic ticket, only whether I can relate to them and be of help. Now, if you haven't watched my last couple of videos, you might be wondering, why the change of scene? My videos are normally scripted and done on green screen so I can put myself in a suitable setting, and then I spend a long time editing that footage into what I hope to be an entertaining and informative package. But right now, my right arm is giving me trouble that makes working at my desk and especially video editing really painful, and nothing but resting it for a couple of months will fix it. That means I can't make my normal kind of content. It's not the first time I've had this problem, as you can probably tell. On top of that, I can't move for things demanding my time and energy lately, so while things remain a bit different, a bit fraught, I decided that rather than making a scripted studio video every fortnight, I'll be making less intense, more informal tea time videos like this every week instead. It'll give me a chance to talk about some of those topics that I wouldn't normally do on the channel, and since it gives me a more timely window to directly answer some of your comments, you might as well let me know about anything you'd like to see over the next couple of months. A couple of weeks ago, I heard from Ruth, who asked me a couple of quite familiar on-the-cusp questions. Of course, the answers to those opened up a whole list of supplementary queries, as is often the case, because every answer in autism always opens up a dozen new questions. I'm very grateful to Ruth for agreeing to let me answer her questions on screen, though, not just because it's easier than writing something from scratch, but because I know I'm answering a real person. Ruth's a well-qualified high school teacher in the US, and she's also studying for a PhD, so she's not shy of a few brain cells. An educated, professional woman who's recently had the possibility she may be autistic raised to her unexpectedly, and she's finding it a little hard to navigate the landscape despite her expertise and training. Like most people on the cusp. She's well on the way to deciding she is autistic and then seeking a diagnosis. That seems to be the most common way it happens for adults these days. Most people who intend to get a formal diagnosis still seem to be 99 to 100% certain of the answer they'll get before they go on the waiting list or stump up the cash for a formal diagnosis. Her trouble is mainly that she's getting conflicting views of what autism actually is. It's confusing for anyone. But if it turns out that she is autistic, I know how conflict like that can wreak havoc with our status quo. Much of the established autism narrative isn't an accurate reflection of what we see in the real world, and for any genuine autist, that'll be a massive poke in the ribs for their sense of veracity. Although its impact on us varies from autist to autist, that sense of veracity, of the truthfulness and consistency of not only statements but the people who make them and the actions they justify, is a core aspect of what defines us as autistic, which leads me to one of Ruth's first questions. Is it possible to be autistic without that sense of veracity? Well, the simple answer is a straight no. The autistic sense of veracity has been fundamental to every definition of autism yet put on record, but they call it different things. Whilst I've talked about the autistic sense of veracity a lot on screen in the past year or two, I haven't yet done the deep dive into all its implications yet. Veracity is about our relationship with received information and how we balance it with what we know already. But that's only part of it, an outward expression of a much deeper motivation, because truth isn't just about accuracy and fairness. It's about consistency. This sense of veracity is what drives us to seek consistency and replicability in our lives, which is why it pulls so many of us towards uncompromising honesty and candour in our communication. Sticking to the truth, to verifiable information, and not hiding anything we think might be pertinent isn't about some higher calling or born of childlike innocence. It's about keeping our lives consistent and manageable. If we lie, then we have to remember not to contradict those lies in front of the people we told them to, taking essential social energy that many autists don't have to spare. So it's easier to tell the truth or to stick to verifiable facts. Read any medical or academic definition of autism, and you'll hear about our need to set and keep to routines, to keep our lives and feelings regulated. Or put another way, we choose to arrange our lives into consistent, replicable patterns. When early learning educators see kids lining up their toys into rows or themed groups instead of playing imaginary games with them, they start thinking of autism. But what they don't see is those kids trying to create a zone of order and consistency within the limits of what they control, those toys. Our sense of veracity is an expression of our desire for safety through order and predictability. In fact, a great deal of the traits or symptoms writ large in the diagnostic manuals can be traced back in whole or in part to our heightened sense of veracity. Same foods, certain types of meltdown, black and white thinking, pathological demand avoidance, rigidity, to name a few, plus plenty of our most precious talents and aptitudes too. And whilst I've touched on some of that in previous videos, there's lots more to be said about veracity. In practical terms, assaults to our sense of veracity have been the biggest factor behind some of us cutting ourselves off from society, hiding from the contradictions and false narratives and comparative safety behind our front doors. You'd be surprised how many non-speaking people bring it up as well. Most autistic people I've met tell me they don't feel comfortable even bending the truth, however noble or harmless it seems at the time, and I'm no exception to that. Even more so, we can find it extremely difficult to ignore hypocrisy and contradiction. None of this means we're infallible, or that knowing someone is autistic is enough to trust they'll never lie, deceive, or cheat you. We have our bad apples too, you know. But on the whole, most autistic folks I've met know exactly what they like and when they like it. Their lives are organised and punctuated around regular, rhythmic beats, and they don't like deception. Like me, they're more than happy to accommodate change when it's necessary or beneficial. But we can be total stick in the muds if we can't see the benefits or the change threatens our safety. which feeds into another of Ruth's questions. Up until recently, she didn't know much about autism beyond what any other average American knows, and that isn't very much. That's not to say that the average Brit or German, for instance, knows that much more either. Ignorance of autism is rife across the world, but each country's public perception is unique and influenced by their politics, their media, and their culture, even before we factor things like education and medical systems into it. Excuse me. When Ruth started looking into autism, she found a lot of contradictions that challenged her views of herself and of what autism is. You see, she didn't stumble across autism in her YouTube feed or arrive at autism after a long soul-searching journey of discovery like a lot of the folks who contact me. It was her therapist who suggested the possibility. Now, I did smile when she told me she answered her therapist's question about possibly being autistic with a comment about how she likes drawing trees, because she thought they said artistic. But I'd be lying if I said it was the first time I've heard folks get the wrong end of the stick like that. She followed her therapist's prompt and did what any intelligent person would do, and looked for the popular autism-centered websites and books, sought out the acknowledged experts in the field and soaked it all up. And got thoroughly confused. Because what she was reading didn't match what she already saw in her autistic students, and if she was autistic, in herself. So, she went looking further afield, seeking out actually autistic voices instead, which is what eventually brought her here. Like a lot of the emails I receive, she'd like to know why it is that us autistic creators don't often come across as remotely like any of the stereotypes she grew up with, or the clinical descriptions for that matter. In fact, her very first question was this: how do you know you're definitely autistic? What if you're a highly sensitive person with a few quirks and migraines rather than actually being autistic? I don't get narked by questions like that anymore, though I'll admit I might have been a bit snappier if I'd been asked it 20 years ago. The whole subject of HSPs, or highly sensitive people, has been a controversial one in the autism world ever since the phrase first appeared. I know a number of autistic folks who see the HSP phenomenon through thoroughly disparaging eyes, their only uncertainty being who they look down on the most, the fools who came up with it or the fools who fall for it. But I'm not riding that particular train of thought myself. It would be silly to suggest there aren't currently some people identifying themselves as HSPs that would get an autism diagnosis if they sought one. It's easy to see why someone might be motivated to accept the eccentric HSP label, but be resistant to the clinical and deficit-ridden autism narrative. But I've also met a few self-ID'd autists, even a couple who were diagnosed who appear to be equally mistaken too. So I can't point the finger in one direction or another. What I do believe to be true, though, is that there are a great many folks out there, some of whom watch my content, who don't fulfill enough of the diagnostic or the community criteria to be considered autistic, but do personally relate to a significant number of autistic traits. If I were to use my triad of distinction framework as a basis, then perhaps someone who relates to the sensory and the emotional side of autism, but who doesn't have the same difficulties dealing with falsehood and inconsistency that I do, might fit that HSP description. Or there's those who have more than enough autistic traits, but their doctors don't think their lives are shitty enough to qualify. People gloss over this too often, but if someone has autistic traits and they don't struggle because of them, they don't meet the diagnostic criteria. To get that magic ticket, you better be hurting or you ain't getting it. It doesn't matter to me how somebody identifies or what labels they accept or reject, though, only that we can communicate and be decent to each other. If we learn from each other or help each other along the way, then it's a worthwhile relationship. If I help someone realise they're not autistic, then I think it's just as good a job well done as if they realise they are. I'll come back to more of Ruth's questions next time, but I'll finish this bit by answering that "how do I know I'm definitely autistic" question, since it was directed at me personally. I don't. None of us do. Autism is real, but it's only real because humans chose to make it so, not nature. Men chose to define a group of human characteristics and personality traits as a disorder and then sought to study it and ultimately correct it. Now, most of the world either knows or is learning how that's a misguided, maybe even dangerous viewpoint to take. But for every step forward society makes, there's always some fragile men with dollar signs in their eyes eager to drag us back to the Dark Ages. But inasmuch as the word autism has any meaning, I'm certain that it describes me. Not because of my 1980s diagnosis before the spectrum was even a thing, nor my 21st century re-diagnosis when it was changed from autism to Asperger's, but because of the thousands of other autistic people I've met, chatted with, or read about over more than 40 years who, in all the ways that count, are just like me. The very fact that I've been here for 7 years making videos about my autistic experience, offering my personal thoughts and theories about what makes us tick to whoever will listen, and had almost unanimous recognition and positive feedback in return, makes it pretty clear. All these other folks with diagnoses know what I'm talking about, whether they agree with my interpretations or not, so clearly we do share something in common that distinguishes us from the crowd. Ever since Leo Kanner's work, we've called that common factor autism. And that's why I know I'm autistic. The non-autistic world tells us autistic people are a mystery. But to me, every autistic person is just a person, and no less relatable to me than anyone else. When all's said and done, I'd rather we didn't have these labels in the first place. I'd like to live in a world where nobody batted an eyelid at the questions I need to ask to satisfy my veracity, and everybody respected my routines. One where accommodating specific sensory needs is par for the course, and wearing mitigating devices or accessories didn't turn heads. And maybe even one where I'm allowed to take time to think about what I'm feeling, what my opinion is, or why I can't make sense of someone's half-baked self-contradictory story without being rushed, ignored, or spoken over. If that was the world we lived in, nobody would need a word like autism, would they? Because we would just be people. Now, there's going to be a cut in a minute for the extra bits I'm recording for the folks who support me on Patreon. These videos are the only way I have of making a living right now, and it's those patrons that help me keep a roof over my head so I can keep doing this. And for a long time, I've not been able to provide them with much added value in return for their kind support. I try to make videos far enough in advance that I can put up ad-free previews for them, but I don't always manage it, and it's not possible with this format. Nonetheless, I'm very lucky to have a solid bunch of supporters who stuck by me through a few turbulent years, and my current circumstances have given me an ideal opportunity to start giving a little more back. In a moment, I want to ask for your help with a spot of personal research into our autistic lives, but before that, I want to tell you about an unexpected comment someone left a couple of days ago on a really old video of mine. It's actually one of my least viewed videos as well. The film discussed what we mean when we use the word normal in everyday contexts against how we use it around autistic folks. I pointed out how it can be both hurtful and undermining when it's used against someone. Not normal is rarely said to be supportive. Now, I make no assumptions about the commenter, their own possible neurodivergence, or their motivation, but theirs is an interesting take on things. Isn't it very unautistic to complain about a word because of its non-dictionary definition, rather than its dictionary definition? I should be able to say something is normal without assuming a value judgment. Now, the video contrasts the dictionary and mathematical definitions of the word normal against the colloquial meanings, what we actually mean when we use the word in real-world conversation. But in particular, the very specific use case of using it as an antonym, an opposite word for autistic. If you suggest someone is either autistic or they're normal, then normal is a value judgment. I wouldn't personally describe my analysis in that film as complaining as much as I would a discussion piece, but they're entitled to their opinion. If they found me whiny or abrasive, then that's fine. I have auditory and moral sensitivities that put me right off some people too, so I get it. You think I was complaining, but what's the unautistic bit about? Did you not know that puns and wordplay are possibly the single most autistic form of humour? Were you not aware that understanding the complete picture about anything, of delving deep into the nitty-gritty of our interest is so intense it's in the clinical descriptions? Special interests? And I guess it slipped your notice that language can and does get used as a weapon against autistic folks so often that the need to analyse every single word is burned into the frontal cortex of every autist who ever opened their mouths. Looking at a problem from every angle imaginable and taking the time to weigh up as many factors as possible before delivering our analysis, let alone our conclusions, is the most autistic thing I can imagine. It really is. I know that doesn't fit with the oldie-worldy black and white thinking trope, so I hope the commenter is past that by now. But even so, they clearly have a lot to learn about autistic folks. But it's the second bit that really had me scratching my head. It appears to be a counter-comment to something that I've never implied, let alone said outright. Don't remember saying you couldn't say normal, or even that you shouldn't. But we'll put that aside and just take the statement at face value. Fair comment. You absolutely should be able to say normal whenever you want. And if your syntax, grammar and punctuation are anything to go by, you live in a country like mine where you have a legally protected right to express your opinions. Yay, freedom! Don't you just love it? Of course, that also makes it my right to say that autistic folks should be able to hear the word normal used in relation to themselves and not have to worry that it's being used to insult them. So, to that commenter, I ask, whose freedom is more important? The freedom of the one wishing to use language that's known to cause misunderstandings and distress, whether intentional or not, or the freedom of the individual to not be antagonised by language that often conceals ill intent? As far as I'm concerned, you can say normal until the cows come home and nobody will bat an eyelid. Normal, 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 see? And you can tell me and every autistic person you meet that we're not normal if you wish. That's what freedom of speech allows you to do. But if you use it to distinguish between someone who's autistic and someone who isn't, it's widely regarded to be disrespectful. So you're fully within your rights to say normal as loud and often as you want about whatever you want. But you now know that when you use it as a synonym for not autistic, you're unlikely to make any autistic friends. If you want to be respectful of your autistic friends, if you have any, then consider that a top tip. Okay, so here's that jump cut for the Patreon bit. Hello again. I realised while I was recording the patrons bit that I do look a bit stubbly on top. I normally shave my head 2 or 3 times a week, but I just haven't had the time this week. So you get the Action Man look today. I was going to do it this morning after failing for the last few days, but we had to take the girls, the cats, for their annual jabs at the vets, which actually went really smoothly. Orla and Neota are probably the most friendly and well-behaved cats I've had. I also realised, I must apologise, I'm stupidly excited about this, that it's this Sunday that Mock the Week starts up again. If you're not in the UK, Mock the Week was one of the best satirical shows on British TV, and it lasted for about 17 years until the BBC suddenly decided satire wasn't their thing anymore and canned it back in 2022. Well, it's back again. It's now on the TLC channel. Dara O'Brien is still hosting. A lot of the same comics will be in the weekly panel. So I know exactly where I'm going to be at 9 p.m. on Sunday. I'm so thrilled. And also this week, it was announced that, what's she called again? Nigella Lawson is going to be taking over from Prue Leith on Bake Off. And I know she's a bit of an acquired taste, but I think she's brilliant. And I'm so looking forward to that. Anyway, that's my silly TV fanboying over with. Before I ask you that research question, though, I would like to say a thank you to everyone who's got in touch over the last few weeks since I laid my troubles out and asked for your help. I got way more responses than I expected, which has been a bit of a challenge in itself. I wasn't a very good manager in conventional workplaces, so I may even need some help with just the basic organisation, but I digress. Not only the amount of folks who came forward, but the compassion and desire to help was nothing short of breathtaking. And not just those who offered help, but the many who just wanted to send me a virtual hug. I also had a notable uptick in new patrons and existing patrons up in their monthly amount too, which helps massively. So big, grateful hugs from Mrs. A and I to all of you. Now, you might remember a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned how competition is toxic to me. I can't stand anything competitive, so I don't watch or play sport. I dislike all games that force me or anyone else to compete against other people, and the idea of gambling or doing the stock market positively horrifies me. It's all just a terrifying alien concept to me that I've had to learn about in order to survive, but I seem incapable of experiencing. I was gobsmacked by the amount of people who replied that they have similar issues with competition and competitive people. I've met a few uncompetitive autists before, but it's not a topic I've discussed out in the open much. So they were from a very small pool. Not so when I spoke of it on here, where it sparked a massive wave of recognition and solidarity. So that made me curious about something related to that. Like a lot of my Generation X and Millennial audience, I grew up playing video games. And next to reading, games have always been my favourite way to rest and regenerate. As games got more sophisticated and immersive over the decades, some video game experiences now stand out as unique in their capacity to engage our emotions and force us to think outside the box. Now, with my life having been completely unpredictable from one hour to the next for longer than I cared to think about, I don't get nearly enough free time or spoons to immerse myself in an absorbing game that often these days. In fact, if I didn't have a Steam Deck so I can take my gaming anywhere now, I don't think I'd get any in at all. But when I do get the chance, there's one thing you can be absolutely certain of. It will be a single-player game. I simply don't play any online games anymore, and I haven't for years, even the ones that are supposed to be cooperative, because no matter what happens, it always gets competitive in some way, and disrespectful, and I just don't enjoy playing anymore when that happens. Thing is, there have been some amazing sounding games and game worlds made in recent years that I definitely wanted to play, until I read the dreaded label of multiplayer. In just the last couple of years, big titles like Helldivers 2 and Ark Raiders, or smaller ones like Marauders, have looked like amazing fictions to play around in, but they're not really open to players who just want their fight to be with a computer, not with other people. And it's not just the people who dick about killing their teammates either. There's always players who take it way too seriously, even on small little teams, and spoil it for less aggressive, less competitive players like myself, who just want to have a laugh in a fun world or enjoy the atmos with their friends. Now, I know the whole single player versus multiplayer debate has been raging amongst the hardened gamer bros, but I found myself wondering about your gaming habits. If you're a gamer, of course. How do you feel your relationship with competition, hierarchy, and duplicity influences the types of gaming experience you choose to enjoy? And do you think you'd feel differently if the games or the online experience was normalised to cater for people who just want to play their games without having to watch their backs? If, like me, you feel your lunch working its way back up the moment something gets competitive, what would make a multiplayer game something you'd want to dive into? And while we're at it, what kind of games do you like playing, or want to see out there to play? And what do you play them on? Anyway, I think I better stop before I think of any more gaming questions. Thank you so much for sharing my tea time with me and listening to me ramble. It's been a total pleasure. Until next week, I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic. Thanks for watching.